So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Heidi, who's going to present some information for us about reviewing literature, and ask her to introduce herself.
Thank you, Hugh. That's really kind. So my name is Heidi Stelling. I'm just going to share screen before I start and make sure everyone can see that. So someone give me a thumbs up. Yes, lovely. Okie dokie. So thank you, Hugh, and thank you to the Incubator for inviting me to give this talk today. I am very junior in my research journey, and this is considered a bit of a near peer opportunity for me to go through some of the problems I've had and also some of the lessons I've learned as well. So I'm a clinical research fellow, currently working with the team at Newcastle University in medical education, but my background is as an obstetrician. So let us go. There's lots of Twitter handles on here, and there's a link to the website if anyone wants further information. So what we're going to cover in today's session is design of literature reviews, whoops daisies, conducting your literature review, analysis of them, and writing it up. Now, design is the area that I'm going to spend most of the time on, and I'm not going to apologize for that, because getting this bit right means that the rest will just follow, and it is just a process after that. But you absolutely need to get this bit right. And I've tried to break this down into about 6 steps, and we're going to go around them in turn. So the first bit is, what do you want to know? So the way to answer this question, or the first thing you need to do with what do you want to know, is what is already known. And sometimes people will refer to this as a quick and dirty literature search, which essentially just means going out there, scoping out what's known, going on Google Scholar. You're not doing a formal literature review or a literature search in sort of one of your more formal databases. You're purely going out there and finding about what is known. Now, you might come to the table already ready and already prepared. You might know what is known because you're already immersed in the literature of your own specialty or your own question, which is great, but you do need to formalize that and just get an idea of what is already known, such that we don't repeat work. Another great area to do this in, and we are going to go on to registering your protocol later on in this talk, but you can go onto some of those websites and look and do a search of your search terms and pick up what else is already going on there, because there's published literature, and then there's obviously literature in progress. And that is why we're all encouraged to register our protocols, because you can find out if someone is doing exactly the same review as you at this time. It's just not yet published, and obviously you don't want to repeat their work. So the purpose of this is to find the gap in the literature and work out what you want to know. But also the other question you've got to ask yourself, and the third question in this, is why do you want to know this? And that will really help you determine what type of review you will pick and how you will go about doing your review. So the next type is design. Now, this is taken from a great paper of the reference I've put in the bottom. There are many, many, many types of literature review. And this was something I sort of, when I first came to the table, I thought, okay, I've come from a very science-heavy medical background. So, systematic reviews, meta-analysis is something we're all very familiar with. But, branching out and looking at the different things that are available. Reviews of reviews, I laughed when I first saw this, but this has become more and more popular. And this is like looking at what has already been done and then adding, looking at what's been done since then, using the same methodology and pulling it all together, sort of an update, if you like, of a review. And you can pick the area that interests you. So I've just picked scoping review out here because there's a really nice paper, which I've highlighted, which will give you a little bit more insight into the particulars of how you're going to follow that, or how you might go about doing this. And each of these different types, you can read the overview paper to give you an idea and target you into where you'd like to go. But then there's certainly other literature that will guide you as to how you might want to undertake this as a process. So design, I've just sort of already touched on this, but we're moving around the search now. So we've done what you want to know, type of search you might want to take, and this is registering. So once you've decided what type of search you're going to undertake, you want to go about registering it. Prospero is something that you might all be familiar with. It's the NIRH platform, and that's going to register your systematic reviews, but there are other things available. So if you want to register scoping reviews, for example, Open Science Framework or the OSF network is there. They've got lots of information on their website, including what they would like out of your protocol. But like I said, these platforms are also really good at looking to see who's published or who is currently undertaking reviews in your area, such that you don't duplicate work. Right, we're moving around the diagram now into search terms. So the first thing you need to do within search terms is define your question. Now, I know some people want to just dive into the literature review, and that was where when I first came here, I thought, oh, I just need to start getting something down and start doing some searches. But actually spending the time with yourself, with your supervisor, and thinking, what is my aim? What are my objectives? And therefore, what are my research questions? And really developing that and before you dive into the literature is really important. So you need to have defined question or questions, and only then can you then break that down into the concepts and synonyms that you might want to try and use to do your literature review. You're going to consider how this will work in each database. Now, we're going to talk about databases after we've done the breakout rooms, but each database or each database interface has its own slightly different way of looking or searching the literature. A lot of them, as we'll touch on later, use the same database, but the interfaces in which you use to access them are sometimes different, and therefore it'll change how you look for certain words. It's really commonplace now to publish your strategy as a supplement, which is great for people who are learning because you can look at what other people have done, but you also need to be mindful of that. So you will, for transparency and rigor in research, you will be asked to show your working out, as it were, and see how you've gotten to where you are. The other side of this is how you break them down into your concepts. You can use what would you call these, like templates, I suppose. So we'll all be familiar with Pico, or those who've come from a clinical background will be familiar with Pico, which you would use in sort of more quantitative work, but there is a qualitative alternative. Now, this might be helpful, it might not be helpful, but this is Spider, so this is the qualitative version, I suppose, of Pico, and this looks at sample terms and how you might break them down, or how you might break down your keywords into synonyms. I hear that word. The phenomenon of interest would be your P. Design. So are you only interested in studies that have used focus groups, for example, and that's what you're going to look at, or are you going to be very broad in that? Some people don't like to use this, or they will miss that out because actually they want all sorts of designs. Evaluation, how are you going to define that? Are you going to define that? And research type, do you just want qualitative studies, or do you want mixed methods? Some people find this useful. They might not use it in the final version of the search strategy, but it helps them break down and helps them try and develop search words or concepts within their mind. Right, we are going to go into breakout rooms now. There's 2 activities within the breakout rooms, which I'm going to go through briefly now. If anyone could take a photograph of this slide, that would be really helpful, or note down the questions. There will be facilities in some of the groups, but potentially not all of them. All of them might be, actually, because we had slightly more people sign up for this than are here currently. So the first activity is to introduce yourselves. The whole purpose of this Getting Started series is having a network of people which you can voice concerns with and build up networks with. So introduce yourself and tell the group about your guilty literary pleasure. So something that you like to read on the slide. Activity 2 is considering the search terms that you might use to investigate each of the questions below. So the first one I've offered you here is, how is self-monitoring incorporated into graduate medical education? Now, I've used this as a particular example because it is a research question in a paper that I'm going to offer you later. And they published, like I said, their search strategy, and it's broken down on each website. So it's a really good sort of activity, if you like, because answers are available, or there's a crib sheet available that you can work through. I'm not saying this is perfect, but it's a good place to start. Alternatively, if you'd prefer, you can work, if someone's already got a search strategy within their group and they're struggling, or they're struggling to try and break down their search strategy into concepts, you can work on this problems together and work through them together. So I'm really easy with what you do within those breakout rooms, but Lee, our brilliant administrator, is going to make that happen magically now. So welcome back, everyone. I hope that was really good. We certainly had some really, really valuable conversation in my group about theoretical frameworks. We didn't actually answer the question, which is fine. That was not, there was no direct where you had to do these groups. But we had some really, really good chat in there. Does anyone want to share anything, or was there any outstanding questions or anything anyone wants to burning question before I move on? No, silence is golden. Okay, I'll go on and share my screen again, and we'll do the end part of the presentation. And then there will be time for questions at the end. Okay, so this is what we've just done in our breakout sessions, and this will be included. We will forward these slides round afterwards, but this is just a summary of your guilty literary pleasure, and I hope we heard a few interesting ideas for summer reading or Christmas reading. And this is the paper that I referred to. So this is the question that I pulled out. There's a copy of the paper, but there's also a copy of the supplementary search strategy on the other side. So again, these are embedded, and you will get them when the slides come out. But please do go through there, because it really is. And not just read this, but what I said to my group is go out and look at, medical education is a good one, because they often do publish the supplements of search strategies. But if you're new to this, go out and look at what they've published and look at how they've broken down their term, because it might give you some ideas as to where to start or how you might break it down. Or the thing that I was really surprised with is sometimes how wide they go and how many terms you've got in your because sometimes you come to this and think, oh, I have to have like 3 concepts that I have, and that's it. But the way they do them and the way they structure them is really interesting. It's also really interesting because this is why I use this particularly as an example, because it gives the breakdown for each database and how they changed it or how they adapted it, and that's really interesting to look at because of how different databases work. And that takes us on to our next slide. So when I came to this first, I probably frequently used Medline, because that's what I used at university. But I remember hearing of all these other things and thinking, oh dear me, where do you even start? So this is a collection of databases here. Okay, so Medline, PubMed, Scopus, Embase, Web of Science, PsycInfo, Eric, Clinell. I'm going to say Clinell, it's not Clinell, that's the wipes we're using. Sinal. But these are all available to you in one way or another, depending on what institution you use. Now, I'm going to just share some interesting insights that I learned, probably the hard way, when I started. So the first of which is, the reason this is in a yellow box, is Medline, PubMed, and Scopus are all versions of this US, I can't say the writing now because it's all gone blank. There you go. US National Library of Medicine. So this is their database, and these are the different interfaces we use to access it. So that will change how you see it, despite the fact it's the same information. So PubMed is freely available, and the way you access that is you can even ask it a question and it'll pull up some papers for you. Medline is the more is the paid for version, so often available through universities, etc., and that'll help you break down the question. So this includes a mesh terms, medical education subject heading terms, and you play with that. I've told people in my breakup group, put a term into that or a keyword into that and look at where it maps, because the first screen it will take you to is trying to encourage you to use mesh headings. And mesh headings are just something that someone has gone through, and sometimes they're done automatically, a computer does them, so it maps them to where it thinks the mesh headings will be, and that will then that might help you focus down your search. So you might think, actually, that is the best mesh heading and that covers everything that I want to know about that subject. Or you might look at the mesh heading and think, no, that doesn't work. I might use that and include a keyword search. So you do play around with that. Don't be scared of them. Do go in. The other thing that I want to highlight in here, oops, not now working, there you go, is the fact that different or the same databases are available on different umbrella services. So this always threw me, and I thought, well, is Ovid a separate database? I don't, like, when I came to this, maybe when I was coming into my masters, and I thought Ovid is just the paid platform that a university will subscribe to, and it picks this. So Newcastle use Ovid, which is why I've used this as an example, and that includes PsycInfo, Embase, Medline, I think it has Sinel on there as well, but they just pay that because then they're paying one company as opposed to paying lots of different databases for their access, and you access it through that forum. So don't be fazed by this, because sometimes you get here and you think, oh my God, where do I even start? There's hundreds of them. But also each database will have its own little idiosyncrasies. So PsycInfo, obviously it says in the name, it's going to be more interested in the psychology focus. Eric is Institute of Educational Science. So you're going to get more of your med ed literature in there. Sunel is more nursing, midwifery sometimes gets a bit in there. And that's just the type of journals they're looking at. So often, again, when I started in this, I thought, well, why is there a million databases? Why don't we just have one? But it is looking at where you want to focus your question. And you'll find in a lot of really good reviews, they'll tell you what databases they've used and why. Because it might be that they chose not to search Sunel because that's not the focus they wanted, that's not the slant that we're taking, and then they'll justify why they're using others. So do look out for that and do consider that when you're formulating your question. Right, inclusion exclusion criteria. So we've come full circle in design. And again, the reason that I designed this like this is the research question is key to everything you're doing here. So what you want to know, the type of search you're going to do, the type of literature review you're going to do, where you're going to register it is dependent on that. Your search terms, everything comes back to this research question. And that's why it's so fundamental. And it's so frustrating sometimes. Do you think I just want to get into the project and do something? But spending that time with your supervisor to really nail down why am I doing this? What is the point and what is the problem I'm trying to address? So I've included here some things that you might want to include in inclusion exclusion criteria. One of the things that people don't like doing, so sometimes when I was a medical student, you can write not. So those of you who use Medline, you can do an and or, so your Boolean functions, but you can also do a not. Now they don't like not because it gets rid of too much that you don't know. You're not in control of it, so they prefer to get through that in a screening process. But be careful with your inclusion and exclusion for the same reason. Okay, so be very careful with what you use as criteria to make sure you're not excluding anything that might actually be of interest. I've just included here an example of an inclusion exclusion criteria, which you might want to consider. But again, this will very much depend on what you're doing and why. And then we're moving on from design to conduct. So this is when you run your search. This is when you've done all the hard work. You've got all the search strategies for each separate database and you just go out and run it and do it. You've registered it as well. So the first thing you're going to do there is remove duplicates. So if you run the same search in 4 different databases, you're going to get some overlap and you want to remove the duplicates, okay? And this is a standard Prisma diagram. You can go on the Prisma website and they've got copies of this that can sort of help you through depending on the reviews you're going to do. So one for systematic reviews, one for scoping reviews. The next thing you're going to do is apply the inclusion exclusion criteria that you've already designed. Now, this can be iterative. So you might get to a point where you think, oh, I hadn't considered that as part of my inclusion exclusion, but it's a really important point. That's fine. And you can update that and you would write, you know, in your reflective notes of your project, you would write why you'd done that. But then you need to make sure you go back and consistently apply the inclusion exclusion criteria from the beginning. So if you've got halfway through, you are going to have to go back to the beginning of those papers to make sure that that didn't apply to any of the others. So obviously trying to get this nailed down before you dive into your data is ideal, but you know, nothing's ever written in stone until it's actually written in stone. The next thing you're going to do is, so that's for your title, abstract level, exclusions. Then you're going to get your full texts, all right? There might be maybes in this. And so when you screen your records and title and abstract, there might be maybes. And that's the area that you might be trying to iteratively improve your inclusion exclusion criteria. If you've got lots of maybes, it is good practice to discuss your maybes. And it's also good practice to double screen. Now you can, if you have time, funds, availability, double screen everything and do that with two reviewers or more, a team of reviewers. The best practice is considered about 10%. So you are going to want to get 10% and a second reviewer to review 10%. And then you're going to do that on a blinded platform. I'm going to show you some examples of that in a minute. And therefore they don't know what you've said. And then if you have any that clash, i.e. especially if you said yes and they said no, you're going to have to work out why that is. And that is then going to potentially upshoot a few things that you're going to want to sit down and look at, and potentially might have to go back again if there's so much ambiguity within your inclusion exclusion that someone said yes and someone said no. You are going to have to go back and look at that first principle wise. You're then going to pull out your full texts, and there's potentially things that by the time you get a full text, actually the inclusion exclusion, especially those maybes that you might have included, might need excluding again. And then you're going to end up with your final studies. Now, this is obviously n equals 11, which is a relatively small sample, but that might be the case. And depending on the level of detail you're doing, my area of research interest is realism. So sometimes, you know, that they aren't going to be giant numbers of data, because you're trying to pull out theory and you're really going to dive in deeply each one of those papers. EndNote or equivalent can be your friend here. It does have a deduplicating function, and it can help you keep sets, groups of papers together for further analysis. But Rian is also very useful for collaborative double screening. There is a free version of Rian available if you sign up, but this allows you the opportunity to add a second reviewer or add multiple reviewers to the same set of data, and it also blinds it for you, so they won't be able to see what you've said. And it will also then pull out the areas that you've disagreed with. So that's conduct. We're then going to move on to extraction and analysis. So this is when you are going to take the papers you have and pull out the things that support or refute your question. Okay, so you need to design your data extraction tool. I should have perhaps covered that in design, but you are going to need to design a data extraction tool that you're going to apply to every paper, and you're going to pull out the information you need. Now, again, this will depend on why you're doing it and what your question is. So you're going to want your study. Some people want site. They want to compare geographically. Is this different in the developed world, developing world, or whatever? Design is going to be an important comment there. What were the participants? But again, this data extraction tool will very much depend on what you want to collect, and it will be consistently applied to each paper. Again, this can be iterative, so you might get halfway through and think, oh, that's a really important element that I haven't thought about. But you are then going to have to go back to the 100 papers you've already analysed and pull out that data for those. Right, writing your report. So this is the final bit of the areas that we said we were going to cover. So when you're writing your report, make a structured, coherent argument. And again, this comes back to the question. If you don't know why you're looking at all these, and you haven't got a really focused question, you're going to just waffle on and you're just going to present the data. You need to be using it in an argument sense, or synthesized in an argument sense for and against the question that you're asking. Synthesize it so it's useful and usable contribution to the literature. You guys all come from different backgrounds, and that's brilliant, but each of you will have the areas that you want to use. So as a clinician, I think this is fabulous that we've reviewed all this data, but what does this mean to me? How can I use this in my practice? And it's really good practice to try and pull that together so that you've got this cohesive conclusion. And it clearly identifies areas for further work. So in effect, a lot of you will do this before you do your project, and you will set it up in effect that you know that this gap exists, and you're going to scope the whole of the literature, look at the whole of the literature to work out what needs filling, what is the gap that needs filling, and then you're going to go on and fill it, hopefully. So thank you for listening to that today. We are available at Twitter on here. You can scan this QR code for further events in this Getting Started series. Please do complete this feedback form. You can tell Hugh that you didn't like the near-peer approach and you would rather he present all of the sessions. I'm totally open to that. But this is now a little bit of time for us to have an open discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and please do be brave and put your questions forward.